My name is Olivia Morgan, and at the age of 27, I never in my wildest dreams anticipated that I would be embroiled in a fierce, heart-wrenching conflict with my own immediate family, my parents and my younger sister, over the precious legacy that my grandparents had so lovingly built and entrusted to me. It all started right after I graduated from law school, a milestone that should have been filled with unbridled joy and new beginnings, but instead marked the beginning of a calculated effort to protect what mattered most. My very first professional action as a newly minted lawyer wasn't to dive into courtroom battles or chase ambitious cases. It was to meticulously transfer my grandparents' substantial $3 million estate into the secure confines of an irrevocable trust, a legal shield designed to preserve their hard-earned assets from any potential threats. Just last week, in a scene that still replays in my mind like a dramatic film sequence, my parents and sister arrived at the front door of our family home, their expressions radiating a smug, almost triumphant glee that immediately set my instincts on high alert. "We've successfully signed the house over to Dad's name," they announced with an air of finality, as if the matter was already sealed and irreversible. "You'll need to pack up and be out by Friday, Olivia." But I stood there, my composure unshaken, meeting their eyes with a serene, knowing smile, and simply replied, "Do you really believe I would ever allow something like that to happen?" Oh, the sheer astonishment and dawning realization on their faces when they returned later that day, accompanied by a team of movers ready to haul away my life, only to discover exactly who and what was waiting for them on that iconic front porch. It was absolutely priceless, a moment of poetic justice that I'll cherish for the rest of my days. But before I plunge headfirst into the intricate details of this captivating story, a tale woven with threads of betrayal, unwavering resilience, and the sweet triumph of justice served, I'd love to hear from you, my listeners and viewers. Take a moment to drop a comment below and share where you're tuning in from today. Are you cozied up in a bustling city apartment in New York, perhaps sipping coffee while overlooking the skyline? Or maybe you're in a quiet suburban home in California with the ocean breeze whispering through your window? Or even from across the globe, in a charming cafe in Paris or a vibrant market in Tokyo. Wherever you are, your location adds to the tapestry of our shared experiences. And if this narrative resonates with you on a personal level, if it stirs memories of your own family struggles, inheritances gone awry, or moments of standing up for what's right, please show your support by smashing that like button and hitting subscribe. Trust me when I say, you absolutely won't want to miss a single twist or turn in how this intense, emotional family drama unfolds to its deeply satisfying conclusion. Stories like this remind us that we're not alone in our battles, and sharing them can be incredibly healing. To fully comprehend the motivations behind my decision to implement such rigorous and unyielding protective measures for my grandparents' estate, we must travel back in time, unraveling the complex history that shaped our family dynamics and set the stage for the conflict to come. My grandparents, Harold and Martha Morgan, were more than just elderly relatives. They were the unwavering pillars of my entire existence, the loving guardians who stepped in to raise me from the tender age of 5 when my world could have easily crumbled. My biological parents, Richard and Elaine Morgan, had made the heartless choice to essentially abandon me, leaving me behind as they pursued what they euphemistically called careers in a distant state far from our Boston roots. But let's call it what it truly was. They were chasing an elusive dream of a life free from the burdens of parenthood and responsibility, bouncing erratically from one failed get-rich-quick scheme to another, each more ill-conceived and disastrous than the last. Their lives were a chaotic symphony of fleeting highs and devastating lows, promises of overnight wealth that dissolved into debt, ventures that promised the moon but delivered only dust. The home where I spent my formative years was no mere residence. It was a breathtaking Victorian mansion, elegantly situated in one of Boston's most revered historic neighborhoods, where tree-lined streets whispered tales of bygone eras. This house, with its intricate gingerbread trim, towering turrets, and expansive wraparound porch, had been a cherished heirloom in my grandfather's family for 3 full generations, symbolizing continuity, heritage, and enduring love. Accompanying this architectural gem were several other valuable properties: a couple of rental apartments in the city center, a small commercial building that generated steady income, and a carefully curated investment portfolio that included stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, collectively estimating the estate's value at around $3 million. Yet for me, the financial appraisal was utterly insignificant compared to the emotional riches it held. That house wasn't just a structure of wood and stone, it was the very essence of home, the sacred space where I discovered the profound, unbreakable meaning of family, far removed from the superficial ties of blood that so often disappoint. Imagine waking every morning to the irresistible aroma of Grandma Martha's freshly baked muffins, wafting through the halls like a gentle embrace. The kitchen would be alive with the sizzle of butter in the pan, the clink of utensils, and her cheerful voice calling out, "Rise and shine, my little lawyer-to-be," a nickname she bestowed upon me long before the notion of law school had even flickered in my young mind. Her muffins weren't just food. They were acts of love, each batch infused with care, sometimes dotted with blueberries from the garden or chocolate chips for special occasions. Grandpa Harold, with his infinite patience that seemed to know no bounds, would take me on weekend adventures to the small pond in the local park, where ducks glided gracefully across the water and the air hummed with the sounds of nature. He'd teach me the art of fishing, his large hands guiding mine as I cast the line, laughing softly when I'd inevitably tangle it in the reeds. "Patience, Olivia," he'd say with a wink. "The best things in life come to those who wait and untangle their messes with care." Those lessons extended beyond fishing. They were metaphors for life, teaching me to navigate challenges with calm and determination. As the day wound down, our evenings would transform into quiet rituals in the library, a room that felt like a portal to other worlds. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with leather-bound volumes that smelled of aged paper and wisdom. Grandpa's favorite armchair, worn from years of use, sat by the crackling fireplace, while Grandma preferred the cushioned window seat, where she could gaze out at the garden's blooming roses. We'd each select a book, me with my adventure stories or school assignments, Grandpa with his biographies of historical figures like Abraham Lincoln or Winston Churchill, Grandma with her classic novels by authors like Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters. The room would fall into a peaceful silence, broken only by the occasional turning of pages or the pop of a log in the fire. Then, someone would share a passage that moved them, a quote on courage, a description of love, or a poignant reflection on life. And we'd discuss it, our voices weaving together in intimate conversation. Those moments weren't just about reading, they were about connection, about building a bond that transcended words, teaching me that true family is forged in shared experiences and mutual respect. From my grandparents, I internalized the foundational values that would shape every aspect of my life. Honesty as an inviolable principle, hard work as the path to fulfillment, and responsibility as the cornerstone of character. Grandpa Harold had a favorite adage he repeated often, his voice steady and wise. "Your word is your bond, Olivia. Break it, and you've lost something that no amount of money can ever repurchase: your integrity." He lived this truth in everything he did, from honoring commitments to friends to managing the family's finances with meticulous care, never taking shortcuts or bending rules. Grandma Martha, with her strong spirit forged from her own challenging upbringing during the Great Depression, emphasized education and independence above all. "A woman must be able to stand on her own 2 feet," she'd say firmly, her eyes sparkling with determination, "especially in a world full of people who might try to knock you down or hold you back." She encouraged me to pursue knowledge relentlessly, sharing stories of how she put herself through night school while working as a secretary, all to build a better life. These values weren't abstract. They were demonstrated daily, in the way they budgeted their fixed income to support local charities, in how they treated neighbors with kindness, even when times were tough, and in their unwavering support for my dreams. In sharp, painful contrast, my relationship with my biological parents and my younger sister, Valerie, was a labyrinth of complexity, marked by disappointment, distance, and a lingering sense of unfulfilled potential. Their visits to our home were infrequent and sporadic, perhaps only twice a year at best, and always seemed timed with ulterior motives. Around Christmas, when the air was thick with expectations of gifts and generosity, or during random periods when their latest financial misadventure had left them desperate and scraping the bottom of the barrel. Each visit followed a depressingly predictable script, like a poorly written play performed over and over. It would begin with an outpouring of exaggerated affection, over-the-top hugs that felt stiff and performative, kisses on the cheek that lacked warmth, and exclamations of, "How we've missed you," That rang hollow. This would quickly transition into casual, seemingly innocent questions about Grandpa's investments. How's the stock market treating those old portfolios? Or, any updates on the rental properties? Inevitably, the conversation would steer toward their latest hardship. A tearful story about unexpected expenses, a temporary setback in their business ventures, or a plea for understanding about their bad luck. And then came the ask. Requests for loans that were framed as temporary bridges but were never repaid. Sums that started small but grew bolder with each visit. My father, Richard, had a history of financial recklessness that was almost legendary in its scope. He declared bankruptcy not once, but twice before I even turned 10, each time blaming external factors, market crashes, dishonest partners, bad timing, rather than his own impulsive decisions. He'd jump into schemes like multi-level marketing programs, selling health supplements, or real estate flips that promised quick profits but ended in losses. My mother, Elaine, was his enabler and partner in these endeavors, dabbling in questionable businesses of her own, selling miracle diet pills through home parties that bordered on pyramid schemes, or promoting timeshares in exotic locations that turned out to be overpriced and underdeveloped. They lived perpetually beyond their means, driving fancy cars they couldn't afford, dining at upscale restaurants on credit, always convinced that the next opportunity would be the one to make them millionaires. Their optimism was infectious at first, but it soured into entitlement over time, a belief that success was owed to them rather than earned. Valerie, born 7 years after me, grew up in this environment of chaos and excuses, learning their manipulative techniques as if by osmosis. By her early teens, she'd mastered the art of emotional leverage, using charm, tears, or guilt to get what she wanted. I remember one particularly vivid incident during a family visit when she was 13 and I was 20. She borrowed money from my wallet without asking, claiming it was for a school project. But when confronted, she turned on the waterworks, insisting it was a misunderstanding. Grandma, ever perceptive, suggested after that visit that Valerie come live with us permanently. The girl needs stability, a structured environment, Grandma said, her voice laced with worry. She's being raised in a whirlwind. But my parents refused outright, defensive and possessive. Valerie is our baby, Mom said sharply. We can handle her just fine. She doesn't need all this old-fashioned stuff. In reality, Valerie required little actual parenting because she mirrored their lax attitudes, demanding minimal guidance while expecting maximum rewards. She became their accomplice in small ways, echoing their complaints about how unfair life was or how Grandpa and Grandma had it easy with their stable life. As my grandparents advanced in age, the family tensions that had simmered for years began to boil over into something more sinister and palpable. Dad's phone calls increased in both frequency and intensity, his questions becoming more direct and probing. How's your health holding up, Pop? Seen the doctor lately? Or, who's handling your financial advisors these days? Still that old firm? There was an undercurrent of calculation in his voice, a hunger for information that set my nerves on edge. Mom took a different tack, sending emails with links to luxurious retirement communities in Florida or Arizona, complete with photos of swimming pools and golf courses. The house is getting too big for you two, she'd write in her messages, her tone saccharine. Think of all the maintenance, stairs, yard work. Wouldn't it be nice to downsize and relax? Each visit became a source of stress, filled with whispered conversations in the kitchen or study that would abruptly stop when I walked in, leaving an awkward silence hanging in the air like a storm cloud. I'd catch snippets, words like will, assets, inheritance, enough to make my stomach twist with suspicion. Throughout my school years, I channeled these underlying anxieties into academic excellence, encouraged by my grandparents' constant, unwavering support. While my classmates received material rewards like new phones or trendy clothes for good grades, my grandparents invested in experiences that enriched my mind and soul. Stacks of books on topics ranging from history to science, annual memberships to the Boston Public Library and local museums, and educational trips to places like the Freedom Trail or the Salem Witch Museum. These outings weren't just fun. They were lessons in history, resilience, and the human spirit. When I turned 16, I took a part-time job at the local library, not because we were desperate, but because I wanted to contribute. I'd noticed the subtle strains on their fixed income, The rising costs of Grandpa's medications, the annual property taxes on our historic home that seemed to climb each year. "It's unnecessary, dear," Grandma would protest. But I'd insist. "I want to help, just like you taught me." That job taught me responsibility, interacting with patrons, organizing events, and even assisting with research queries, which sparked my interest in information and justice. The pivotal moment that steered me toward a career in law occurred during my senior year of high school, triggered by a devastating incident in our tight-knit neighborhood. The Wilsons, an elderly couple who'd lived 3 doors down for as long as I could remember, fell victim to their own son's greed. Mr. Wilson, a retired teacher, and Mrs. Wilson, a former nurse, had built a modest but comfortable life savings over decades. Their son, whom I'd seen at holiday gatherings as a child, convinced them to sign over power of attorney, promising to handle their affairs as their health declined. Instead, he systematically drained their accounts, transferring funds to his own name, selling their stocks, even taking out loans against their home. By the time it was discovered, they were left with nothing but heartbreak and a mountain of debt. I visited them once after the scandal broke, bringing a basket of Grandma's muffins. Mrs. Wilson's eyes, once bright with stories of her nursing days, were dim with betrayal. "We trusted him," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was our boy." That helplessness, that profound sense of injustice haunted me for months. It ignited a passion to understand legal protections, to learn how to prevent such abuses, especially for vulnerable seniors who deserved peace and security in their twilight years. College was a whirlwind of discovery and challenge, but law school pushed me to my limits, compounded by my grandparents' gradual health decline. Grandpa's heart problems escalated, requiring surgeries that left him weakened, his once strong frame now relying on a walker or wheelchair. Grandma's early-stage dementia began to manifest in small ways: forgotten names, misplaced items, moments of confusion that broke my heart. To stay close and provide care, I attended a local university, declining scholarships to more prestigious schools like Harvard or Yale that would have taken me hundreds of miles away. My days became a juggling act, attending lectures on torts and contracts, studying case law late into the night under the glow of my desk lamp, and squeezing in time for doctor's appointments, medication management, and household chores. I'd drive Grandpa to his cardiologist, help Grandma with her memory exercises, and still make it to class, often running on coffee and sheer will. The exhaustion was relentless, a constant ache in my bones. But I never complained. They had sacrificed so much for me, giving up their retirement dreams to raise a child they didn't have to. This was simply what family did, showing up no matter the cost. The day I graduated from law school remains etched in my memory as a blend of triumph and melancholy. Standing on the stage in my cap and gown, the tassel swaying as I accepted my diploma, I scanned the audience and locked eyes with Grandpa. He sat in his wheelchair, his oxygen tank discreetly at his side, his face beaming with pride despite the effort it took to be there. Beside him was Grandma, her expression occasionally drifting into confusion, but lighting up with a radiant smile whenever our gazes met, as if she knew this was a moment to celebrate. They had insisted on attending, brushing aside my concerns about their health. "Wild horses couldn't keep us away," Grandpa had declared that morning, his voice firm as I helped him with his tie, his hands trembling slightly from the Parkinson's that had begun to set in. In stark contrast, my parents and Valerie were absent, despite invitations sent months in advance. A curt text from Mom arrived that morning, citing unavoidable car trouble, but I had long ago stopped expecting their presence at my life's key moments. The absence was a familiar sting, like a bruise that never fully healed, but it was overshadowed by the love radiating from my grandparents. After the ceremony, we celebrated at Grandpa's favorite Italian restaurant, a quaint spot with red checkered tablecloths, soft lighting, and the aroma of garlic and fresh pasta filling the air. The staff knew us well, greeting Grandpa like an old friend and bringing his usual, spaghetti bolognese with extra parmesan. With a shaky hand, he raised his water glass in a toast, his voice cracking with emotion. "To our Olivia, who makes us prouder every single day. The finest granddaughter a man could ask for, and now the finest lawyer in all of Massachusetts." The small group of family friends and neighbors clapped, and Grandma nodded enthusiastically, adding with a sparkle in her eye. Smart as a whip, just like her grandfather. Their pride filled me with a profound joy, but also a determination to be worthy of it. to use my new skills not for personal gain, but to protect those I loved. In my final semester of law school, I had elected to take a course on elder law and estate planning, viewing it initially as a practical tool given my grandparents' situation. However, under the guidance of Professor Sarah Winters, a former prosecutor with a passion for protecting the vulnerable, it evolved into a true calling. Professor Winters was a force, tall, with sharp features and a voice that commanded attention. She'd share stories from her career, cases where seniors were exploited by caregivers or family, and the statistics were sobering. The greatest threat to an elderly individual's financial security rarely comes from strangers, she lectured one day, her eyes scanning the class. 70% of elder financial abuse is perpetrated by family members or trusted caregivers. The sense of betrayal is often more devastating than the financial loss itself. Her words hit me like a thunderbolt, drawing unnerving parallels to my own family's patterns. The probing questions, the sudden interest during health scares. I began researching protective measures in earnest, focusing on irrevocable trusts, which could lock away assets from predatory claims while allowing the creators to benefit during their lifetimes. The case studies we dissected, sons draining parents' savings, daughters contesting wills, mirrored my fears with alarming accuracy, heightening my resolve to act. 2 weeks after graduation, with my diploma still fresh and my bar exam looming, I made a secret appointment with Nancy Hoffman, an elder law specialist highly recommended by Professor Winters. Nancy's office was in a quiet downtown building, filled with books on trusts and estates, and she greeted me with a warm handshake and keen eyes. I brought copies of my grandparents' financial documents, which I had access to from helping with their bills and taxes. She reviewed them carefully, her brow furrowing as she noted patterns, the unpaid loans to my father, the increasing inquiries about property values. "Your instincts are correct," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. "Given the behavior you've described, there's definite cause for concern. An irrevocable trust would offer significant protection, but your grandparents must establish it voluntarily." "Have you discussed this with them?" I hadn't, fearing it would shatter their illusions about their son. That evening, after a dinner of Grandma's homemade chicken pot pie, comfort food that always soothed the soul, I gathered my courage. We sat in the living room, the grandfather clock ticking softly in the background. Grandma, there's something important I want to talk about," I began, my voice steady but gentle. Grandpa's reaction was immediate and defensive, as I'd anticipated. "Richard is many things. Flawed, yes, but he would never try to take our home from us," he insisted, his voice gruff with emotion, his hands clenching the arms of his chair. "He's still my son, Olivia. Blood of my blood." Grandma was quieter, twisting her wedding ring, a gold band worn thin from decades of marriage, as she often did when anxious or deep in thought. "What makes you think such a thing, dear?" she asked finally, her eyes searching mine for answers. Reluctantly, I laid out the evidence I'd collected over the years, the spike in visits whenever their health took a downturn, the casual but persistent questions about their investments and retirement plans, the not-so-subtle hints that the house was becoming too much work for them. Then I showed them the smoking gun, an email from Dad to a local real estate agent inquiring about comparable sales in the neighborhood and the potential market value of their home, which I discovered while helping Grandpa fix a computer glitch. The room fell silent as they read it, the weight of the words sinking in. Grandma began to cry quietly, her shoulders shaking. "He borrowed $50,000 5 years ago," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "for a business opportunity that couldn't wait. He promised to pay it back with interest, but when your grandfather asked about it last Christmas, he got angry. Said we were wealthy enough not to miss it, that we owed him for taking you in instead of him raising you himself." Grandpa's face had grown pale, the lines of age deepening with resignation. "Show me that trust information again," he said at last, his voice heavy but determined. 3 days later, we were in Nancy Hoffman's office, the process of establishing the Morgan Family Trust officially underway. The legal process was intricate and time-consuming, requiring multiple meetings with attorneys to draft the trust agreement, financial advisors to assess the assets, and bank representatives to facilitate transfers. We structured the trust so that my grandparents retained full control and benefit during their lifetimes. They could live in the house, use the income from investments, and make decisions as trustees. But upon their passing, I would become the successor trustee, managing the assets according to their explicit wishes, which emphasized preserving the family home and using the estate for charitable purposes if needed. The house's deed was retitled in the trust's name, investment accounts were reassigned, and valuables like Grandma's jewelry and Grandpa's antique clock collection were documented and protected. Throughout, we maintained absolute secrecy. My grandparents told no one, not even their closest friends from the bridge club or church group. I continued living with them, starting my career at a small law firm specializing in family law, balancing client meetings with caregiving duties. To the outside world, nothing had changed. The house stood as it always had, a beacon of stability. But for me, knowing their legacy was safeguarded brought a profound sense of peace, a shield against the storms I sensed brewing. 6 months after the trust was established, Grandpa's health took a dramatic and irreversible turn for the worse. What we had dismissed as simple fatigue related to his heart condition was diagnosed as advanced stage pancreatic cancer, the kind that spreads silently and strikes hard. The prognosis was grim, 3 to 6 months at best, and the news hit us like a freight train, leaving us reeling in a haze of grief and denial. We spent days in doctors' offices, consulting specialists, exploring treatment options, but the reality was stark. Palliative care was the path forward. Somehow, word of his diagnosis reached my parents almost immediately, perhaps through a distant relative or a slip in conversation. Suddenly, their interest surged. They began calling daily, their voices laced with feigned concern, and visiting weekly, an unprecedented level of attention that felt more like reconnaissance than familial support. Valerie even took a leave of absence from her job at a trendy nail salon, arriving with bags of takeout and offers to help, though her assistance largely consisted of lounging on the couch, scrolling her phone, and occasionally going through closets and cabinets, cataloging items of value when she thought no one was watching. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of orange over the garden, I rose from Grandpa's bedside to fetch his pain medication. The house was quiet. The only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the tick of the clock. But as I passed the open window, I overheard a conversation in the garden below, my parents thinking the household was asleep. "Once the old man is gone, we need to move quickly before she has time to hide anything," Dad was saying in a low, conspiratorial tone. "Mom is so confused these days with her dementia. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her without question." Mom hesitated, her voice uncertain. "What about Olivia? She's always watching like a hawk, and now she's a lawyer." Dad scoffed, his laugh bitter. "She's a brand new lawyer with student loans up to her ears and no real experience. We'll offer her a small cut to keep her mouth shut. If she makes trouble, we'll contest any will on grounds of undue influence. After all, she's been living here rent-free, dependent on them for years, possibly manipulating them the whole time. Who would believe her word over ours, the actual children?" I stood frozen in the shadows, the glass of water in my hand growing warm as they continued plotting, discussing how they'd sell the house for top dollar, liquidate the investments, and finally afford the luxurious lifestyle they deserved. When Valerie joined them, her voice eager as she suggested which antiques would fetch the highest prices at auction, I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, the betrayal cutting deep. The next morning, over breakfast of oatmeal and fresh fruit, Grandma's attempt to keep things normal, I called Nancy Hoffman and updated her on the overheard conversation. She was calm but firm. "The trust is solid, Olivia. Irrevocable and properly filed. But be vigilant. They might try to get your grandmother to sign new documents once your grandfather passes. Document everything, and don't let them alone with her." As Grandpa grew weaker, his body wasting away but his spirit still sharp, he seemed to sense the vultures circling. One night, as I sat with him in the dimly lit bedroom, the hum of his oxygen machine a constant backdrop, he gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Promise me you'll protect your grandmother in this house," he whispered, his eyes locking onto mine with intensity. "It's not just property, Olivia. It's the physical embodiment of our family history, our love, our sacrifices. The walls hold echoes of laughter. The garden blooms with memories. Richard never understood that. He sees only dollar signs where I see the life we built." Tears streamed down my face as I promised, my voice choking. He nodded, satisfied, and slipped into a coma 3 days later. He passed peacefully the following morning, with Grandma and me at his bedside, holding his hands as the first light of dawn filtered through the curtains. The funeral was small and dignified, just as Grandpa would have wanted. A gathering of a few close friends, longtime neighbors, and former colleagues from his days as a school principal. The church was filled with the scent of lilies, and the minister spoke of Grandpa's integrity and kindness. My parents and Valerie arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in flashy outfits that seemed more suited to a cocktail party than a morning service. Mom in a bright red dress, Dad in a suit with shiny cufflinks, Valerie in skinny jeans and high heels. They left immediately after the service, claiming a long drive ahead, but not before Dad pulled me aside in the parking lot. "When's the will being read?" he asked bluntly, his eyes avoiding mine. I kept my response vague, my heart heavy. In my eulogy, I focused on Grandpa's gentle wisdom, his unconditional love, and how he measured wealth not in money, but in the love he shared. Looking out at the small crowd, I realized the truth of it. Grandpa had been rich beyond measure. Assuming sole caregiving for Grandma was a weight that settled heavily on my shoulders, her dementia accelerating in the wake of grief. Some days she recognized me instantly, her face lighting up as we baked cookies or tended the garden. Other days, she'd ask repeatedly when Grandpa was coming home, her eyes searching the empty rooms, and I'd have to gently remind her he was gone, watching her heart break anew each time. The pain was excruciating, a cycle of loss that tested my resolve. I rearranged my work schedule to spend more time at home, taking on cases I could handle remotely from my laptop in the library. I hired Margaret, a compassionate home health aide with a gentle demeanor and years of experience, to stay with Grandma when I had to be in the office or court. Margaret became a lifeline, not just for Grandma but for me, sharing stories, helping with meals, and providing emotional support. In the evenings, we established new rituals to anchor Grandma's wandering mind. Watching classic movies like Casablanca or Gone with the Wind, films she remembered from her youth. Flipping through old photo albums, reliving weddings, birthdays, and vacations, and reading aloud from her favorite books, her head resting on my shoulder as the words brought fleeting clarity. My parents called occasionally, their inquiries always circling back to Grandma's condition in a way that felt more like monitoring an investment than expressing genuine care. "How's she doing mentally?" Dad would ask, his tone probing. "Any confusion with paperwork or finances?" I provided minimal information, my protectiveness growing as Grandma became more vulnerable, her world shrinking to the familiar confines of the house. 6 months after Grandpa's death, Grandma developed pneumonia, a common complication for someone in her condition. Despite aggressive antibiotics and hospital stays, her weakened system couldn't fight it off. Her final days were spent at home in her own bed, as she had always wished, surrounded by the comforts of her life. I read to her from Jane Austen, her favorite author, the tales of Pride and Prejudice bringing a faint smile to her lips. I played the classical music she and Grandpa had loved, Beethoven's symphonies, Chopin's nocturnes, filling the room with melody. On her last night, she had a rare moment of complete lucidity, squeezing my hand tightly. "Elizabeth," she said, confusing me with my mother, "I'm so proud of the woman you've become. So different from—" She trailed off, her eyes distant, then refocused. "Take care of our Olivia." Before I could correct her, she drifted back to sleep, her breathing shallow. She never woke again, passing quietly in the night, her hands still clasped in mine. The funeral was even smaller than Grandpa's, a private service with just a handful of neighbors and Margaret. My parents didn't attend, sending a generic flower arrangement with a card signed by their secretary, a gesture that felt as cold as it was impersonal. I wasn't surprised, but the confirmation of their indifference deepened my sadness. I buried Grandma beside Grandpa in the small cemetery where generations of Morgans rested, the autumn leaves falling like a gentle blanket over their graves. Standing there, the wind whispering through the trees, I took comfort in knowing they were together again, free from pain and reunited in whatever comes next. Returning to the empty house was like stepping into a ghost town, every room echoing with memories that were both comforting and painful. The kitchen still smelled faintly of her baking. The library held the imprint of Grandpa's chair. For the first time in my life, I was truly alone, without the anchors who had been my true north. But I was also strengthened by their legacy, the values they instilled, the love they gave. I would honor them by protecting what they had built and using it as they would have wished. 2 weeks after Grandma's funeral, as I was still navigating the fog of grief, adjusting to the silence that now filled the halls, the doorbell rang on a Sunday morning. Peering through the peephole, I saw my parents and Valerie standing there, their expressions carefully arranged in somber masks. I opened the door and Mom pulled me into a stiff hug that felt more like a performance for any watching neighbors than genuine affection. "Oh, Olivia, we're so sorry about Mom," she exclaimed, her voice pitched a bit too high. Dad nodded solemnly, patting my shoulder awkwardly. "Family needs to stick together in times like these," he declared, stepping past me into the foyer, his eyes already scanning the antique furniture, the oil paintings on the walls, the crystal chandelier overhead. Valerie, now 20 but dressed like a teenager in ripped jeans and a crop top, gave me a quick side hug. "This house is even bigger than I remembered," she commented, not bothering to hide her assessment of its value, her gaze lingering on the silverware cabinet. I invited them in with forced politeness, offering coffee from the pot I'd brewed earlier and a plate of store-bought pastries, as baking felt too raw a reminder of Grandma. As we sat in the living room, the same room where we'd shared so many evenings, the conversation followed a script I could have predicted word for word. It started with cursory questions about Grandma's final days. "Was it peaceful?" Mom asked, her eyes darting around. But it quickly pivoted to the real agenda. Inheritance. "Have you had a chance to look through her papers?" Dad inquired, and trying for casual but failing. "I assume there's a will that needs to be probated." I replied neutrally, "I'm handling everything. Her affairs were in good order." Mom leaned forward, her voice dropping to what she thought was a sympathetic tone. "You must be so lonely in this big house all by yourself. It's a lot for one person to maintain, especially someone young like you." "Actually, I'm managing fine," I said, sipping my coffee. "I love this house. It's full of memories." "Well, of course you do, sweetie," Mom said with a patronizing smile. "But realistically, a young woman like you should be in a modern apartment downtown, close to other professionals, nightlife, all that. Your father and I have been thinking. We could help you sell this place and find something more suitable for your lifestyle." Dad nodded enthusiastically, his eyes lighting up. "Property values in this neighborhood are at an all-time high right now. It would be smart to sell before the market shifts. We could get top dollar." Valerie, examining her manicure, added pointedly, "And whatever comes from Grandma and Grandpa's estate should be divided fairly between all family members. I mean, just because you lived with them doesn't mean you get everything, right?" "That's not fair." Their transparency was almost comical, their greed laid bare like an open book. If I hadn't been grieving and disgusted, I might have laughed at how poorly they disguised their intentions. Instead, I simply stated that I wasn't making any decisions about the house in the immediate future and changed the subject to the weather. They stayed for 3 days, a tense period where I caught Mom going through Grandma's jewelry box when she thought I was on a work call, Dad measuring rooms and taking photos for memories, and Valerie trying to pry information from Margaret about bank accounts and safety deposit boxes. On the second evening, I stepped onto the back porch for fresh air, the stars twinkling above, and overheard Dad on his phone in the garden. "The comps show at least 3.2 million in this market," he was saying excitedly. "Maybe more with some quick updates. We just need to move fast once we have control." Later that night, I found Valerie's laptop left open in the guest room, the browser showing search results for challenging a trust and contesting inheritance. Digging into the history, I discovered queries for local estate attorneys and how to prove undue influence in elderly parents. The next morning, over a breakfast of eggs and toast that I prepared to keep things civil, I confronted them gently but directly. "I've noticed you all seem very interested in the house and Grandma's assets," I said calmly, pouring more coffee. "Is there something specific you're hoping to find or discuss?" Dad flushed red, his fork pausing midair, but he recovered quickly. "Just trying to help you sort things out, honey. You've got enough on your plate with your new career and all this grief." Mom nodded vigorously, her smile forced. "We were just concerned about you, darling. Such a big responsibility for someone so young and inexperienced." "And we want to make sure everything is fair," Valerie added, her tone sharp. "Grandma and Grandpa might have been confused in their later years. Dementia and all that." I simply nodded and said I appreciated their concern but had everything under control. They left later that day, with promises to return soon to help further, their car pulling away as I watched from the porch, a mix of relief and dread washing over me. The moment they were gone, I called Nancy Hoffman and updated her on the situation, detailing the snooping and overheard conversations. She advised vigilance, but reassured me the trust was secure. For several weeks, there was silence from them, a false calm that allowed me to throw myself into work, taking on a new case at the firm involving a disputed will. I began to hope, perhaps naively, that they had accepted the situation and moved on. But then, without warning, they reappeared, striding up the front path as I was leaving for work, their expressions triumphant, Dad carrying a thick folder of documents. "Good morning, Olivia," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "We hate to do this, but we need to talk about your living situation." Mom stepped forward, her smile tight and unnatural. "We found some papers in our safe deposit box, an older will that your grandparents signed years ago, leaving everything to your father as their only child. We've had it verified by an attorney." Valerie added gleefully, "And there are papers showing the house has been signed over to Dad. The trust you think protects everything? Apparently not valid when there's a prior will." Dad extended the folder toward me. "We're not unreasonable. We'll give you until Friday to pack your things. We've already lined up a buyer for the house." I looked at their smug faces, the folder of what I was certain were fraudulent documents, and felt a strange, empowering calm settle over me. "You really think I would let that happen?" I asked quietly, my voice steady. Their confidence faltered for a split second, but Dad recovered. "This is happening whether you like it or not. Friday, Olivia, be out by noon." As they turned to leave, I called after them. "Before you do anything irrevocable, you might want to consult a better lawyer, one who knows the difference between a genuine will and a fabrication." Dad's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. "Don't threaten me, young lady. You're not the only one who knows about the law." With that, they left, confident in their supposed victory. I immediately called Jake Thompson, a colleague from my firm who specialized in fraud cases, and explained the situation in detail. "Bring me those documents if you can get copies," he said, his voice grim. "This sounds like textbook forgery. Several felonies if they're trying to file them." I spent the next 2 days preparing for the confrontation I knew was coming, gathering all the trust documents, contacting the bank and security company, and assembling a small team of legal professionals who were willing to help pro bono, moved by my story. On Thursday evening, I sat on the porch swing, Grandpa's favorite spot, where he'd rock back and forth reading the newspaper, and felt his presence beside me. "I won't let them take your legacy," I promised the evening air. "Not one piece of it." The moment my family left with their threats and fraudulent documents, I sprang into action, my legal training kicking in like a well-oiled machine, blended with the protective instincts my grandparents had nurtured in me since childhood. This was no longer just about an inheritance or property rights. It was about honoring my solemn promise to Grandpa, standing up to years of manipulation, entitlement, and emotional neglect. It was about justice. For my grandparents, for myself, and for the principle that family should mean support, not exploitation. First, I called Jake Thompson, the best litigator at my firm and a specialist in fraud cases, his reputation built on dismantling scams and forgeries. "Can you come over tonight?" I asked, my voice urgent but controlled. "My family is trying to steal the estate with forged documents. They're giving me until Friday to vacate." Jake arrived within the hour, bringing his paralegal, a sharp young woman named Lisa, and a sense of professional calm that steadied me. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Grandma had taught me to roll dough for pies, and I laid out everything. The trust documents, my grandparents' medical records showing they were fully competent when signing, the journal I'd kept documenting my parents' suspicious behavior over the years, and my recollection of the fraudulent claims they'd just made. Jake examined the folder they'd waved at me. I'd snapped photos with my phone, and his expression hardened. "If these are what I think, they're committing forgery, fraud, attempted theft by deception, multiple felonies. But we need physical copies to confirm. In the meantime, let's build your defense." My next call was to Nancy Hoffman, who had helped establish the trust. "They're making their move," I told her, detailing the prior will and fake deed. Nancy was reassuringly calm, her voice an anchor in the storm. The trust is ironclad, Olivia. Assets in an irrevocable trust are removed from the estate. No will can touch them. But we should file for an emergency injunction to prevent any recording of fraudulent deeds or transfers at the registry. I'll draft it tonight and file first thing tomorrow. With my legal team mobilizing, I turned to practical security measures. I called a locksmith who arrived that afternoon, changing every lock on the doors and windows, ensuring no one could enter without my permission. Next, I contacted a security company to install cameras covering all entrances and the perimeter, the kind with motion detection and remote access via my phone. By evening, the house was fortified, a digital fortress protecting the physical one. I made a final call to my bank, speaking with the manager who'd known my grandparents for decades. Flag all accounts for unusual activity, I instructed. No transfers without my explicit approval as trustee. The manager, appalled by the story, personally placed alerts on everything connected to the estate, even offering to review recent statements for anomalies. As night fell, I organized all the documentation, trust agreements, asset transfer records, medical certifications, creating multiple copies stored in different locations. One set in the home safe Grandpa had installed in the study, another with Jake, a third with Nancy, and digital versions in encrypted cloud storage. No single point of failure could compromise our protection. That evening, as I reviewed everything under the library's lamp, my phone began ringing incessantly with calls from my parents and Valerie. I let them go to voicemail, listening later as the messages started politely. Dad suggesting we talk things through like adults, but quickly devolved into threats. "You have no idea who you're messing with," the final voicemail from Dad growled, his voice laced with rage. "I am your father, and you will respect me. That house and money are rightfully mine, and I will have them one way or another." The words sent a chill down my spine, but they also fueled my determination. The next morning, I met with the expanded legal team Jake and Nancy had assembled. Sophia Rodriguez, a specialist in estate litigation with a track record of winning high-stakes inheritance disputes, reviewed our documents and strategy. "Their claim about a prior will overriding the trust is baseless," she confirmed, her voice confident. "Once assets are transferred into an irrevocable trust, they're no longer part of the probate estate. Any competent lawyer would know this, which suggests they either have a shady attorney or, more likely, no legitimate one at all." We developed a multi-pronged approach. The injunction to block property transfers and a cease and desist letter demanding they stop their fraudulent claims, and preparation for a lawsuit alleging harassment and attempted fraud if they persisted. "What about the documents they have?" I asked. "The supposed earlier will and property transfer." Sophia explained. "If they attempt to file those, we'll challenge them immediately as forgeries. We have overwhelming evidence of your grandparents' intentions. The trust, medical records, your journal, and witnesses like Margaret who can testify to their clear wishes." While the legal team worked, I began gathering evidence of my parents' history of financial misconduct to strengthen our case. Using contacts from law school and public records searches, I documented Dad's 2 bankruptcies, a tax lien from unpaid IRS debts, and a small claims judgment against Mom for a failed business venture where she'd taken investments from friends but never delivered the promised products. By Thursday afternoon, my family's desperation was evident. Valerie posted a rambling rant on social media, accusing me of manipulating our sick grandparents and stealing the family legacy, tagging extended family and old neighbors to rally support. My parents took a more direct approach, showing up unannounced at my law firm, demanding to speak with me. When the receptionist explained I was in court, they caused a scene, shouting about family matters until security escorted them out. My colleagues were shocked but rallied around me, offering support and resources. The incident only strengthened our resolve. Later that day, a concerned neighbor called. Dad had been going door to door on our street, spreading lies that I was mentally unstable and trying to garner community support for their takeover of the property. Fortunately, most neighbors had known my grandparents and me for years, witnessing our close bond, and were suspicious of these sudden concerned relatives they'd rarely seen. As Friday approached, I prepared for all contingencies. Jake would be at the house with me, along with Nancy, Sophia, Patricia the notary to witness interactions, and Margaret ready to testify. I contacted the local police, explaining the situation and requesting they be on standby for any disturbance. The officer took detailed notes, promising to flag the address. Finally, I set up legal recording devices in the main rooms, with visible signs notifying of audio and video surveillance to comply with Massachusetts' two-party consent law. Thursday night, sleep eluded me, my mind racing through scenarios. But beneath the anxiety was a bedrock of certainty. I was doing what my grandparents would have wanted, protecting their home with the strength they taught me. Friday morning dawned clear and bright, a beautiful spring day that contrasted the brewing storm. I woke early, showered, and dressed in a professional Navy suit, reaching for Grandma's pearl earrings for luck. By 8:30, my team arrived, bringing coffee and reassurance. At 11:45, their SUV and moving truck pulled up. Dad emerged first, waving the movers forward. I stood on the porch, folder in hand. "Right on time," Dad called. I revealed the surveillance and my team stepped out. Jake addressed them, Sophia presented the injunction, I played the recording. Police arrived and they left defeated. In the aftermath, I declined charges, renovated the house, founded the scholarship, and built a chosen family. Valerie's apology came years later. Parents faded. The trust preserved more than property. It gave me a foundation to thrive. Have you faced betrayal over money? Share below. Like, subscribe, share. Thank you. Protect what matters. Music.